Hello and welcome to the Extra Podcast. This is episode 248. Around the table with me today we have Greg.
Hi.
Andy.
Hi.
And Paul.
Hi.
Greg and Paul are still going through puberty.
I'm just impersonating Greg.
And this is Matt.
We're mature over here.
Matt's
Your
hosting
silent producer.
Matt, you didn't even... Oh, yeah, okay.
The silent
finally.
producer. You know
Here
what?
comes
You
the
put
name.
in your time, Matt, and the day comes that you get behind the mic. Congratulations.
I'm now speaking.
That's very gravelly.
Thank
That's
you.
very gravelly.
Matt actually has a
Voice.
very good hosting voice.
That's all right.
Don't you think?
I try to drop it a little bit.
What?
Yeah, I'm just trying to be encouraging. You know what? It's great. Glad that you're here, Matt. We appreciate you. Thanks for hosting.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. I heard somebody's
going on,
birthday
buddy?
soon.
Paul has a birthday coming up.
Whoa.
Don't you?
What? Do you have a birthday coming
Yeah,
up?
I actually do.
It's coming
When?
up in April 14th,
Nope.
May 32nd,
No, you had the month right. April.
April 29th.
April 14th, by the way. That's my wife's
April
birthday.
32nd? Is that what you said?
Yeah. So May 1st.
Yeah. No.
40, Paul?
It is.
Is it?
It is, actually. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
I know.
You're old. Mm-hmm. Just going to break it to you.
Yeah, almost midlife.
Okay, here's
No,
something.
that is midlife, isn't it?
So Paul and I
What
got
do they
to-
I'm
Consider
living past
midlife.
80. Dude, I'm going past 80.
I remember my
Lord
father
wills.
getting over the hill cards
course.
at 40.
You what?
My father got over the hill birthday cards at 40.
Oh, yeah.
And there was flamingos on the lawn.
Really? At 40? I thought that was a 50 thing.
I think we
know.
would agree, though, that once you hit 40, you are technically old at that point.
Wow.
Probably.
Okay, here's something people need to know about Paul, though. Because Paul and I, we were in a room together for the ETS conference. They put the teaching associates in a room. Paul has socks that are basketball players. He has Sean Kemp basketball socks that his
Yes.
socks literally have a printout of Sean Kemp from the Seattle Supersonics.
Yes, in the
He is-
dunk contest.
He is Larry
in like
Bird.
1993, I think.
And if you pay attention, like you'll wear these with dress shoes.
Totally.
Like to work, you'll wear a nice outfit with dress shoes and your Larry Bird socks.
Amen.
So you're turning 40, but barely.
Yeah. No, totally. I have my, even when I've worn them to preach, for sure.
You have,
For sure.
really?
Yeah.
That's impressive.
They
See,
give you
that's
comfort.
That's a lot of.
They're the best socks. Well, they aren't the best socks. The best socks I have are these merino wool socks that are
Smart
just
wool.
soft and they're
So
amazing.
good.
But the other two, for cotton socks, those basketball, the socks are the best. They're made by a company called Stance.
So will your mom be making spelt butter horns for your 40th birthday?
She made some spelt Pascha this week for Easter, which is fantastic. As good as those butter horns we had a couple weeks ago.
They were delicious, Paul.
Yeah.
They were really good. But
You bet.
those were
Yeah.
not spelt, were they?
No,
No.
yours weren't.
Because
no.
whenever I put anything with spelt in it in my mouth, I have to spit it out because it's disgusting.
You've
Greg.
never had spelt.
You know what? I almost did once.
Yeah, so
It
you're
was
a real
pizza.
you're a real expert on the matter. You almost tasted something with spelt in it.
And it was gross, Greg.
Yeah,
it
you
was
could-
really gross.
Can I ask a question about the socks?
Love it.
Did they have a picture of him dunking
Yes.
on the socks?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's some serious.
I might be able to wear them tomorrow. I think they
You
just
should.
got washed.
They help with your sermons, I
you,
guess, eh?
You know how sometimes, like every time we have a photo for our podcast? I think this time it should be a photo of Paul's socks.
All right.
All right.
I don't know if we can make that happen, but I think we should try.
Does anyone else have funny socks?
No, I got
Or are you
lame
adults?
socks.
Got normal adult socks.
Me too.
Yeah.
We
I
went-
actually inherited my socks, believe it or not.
We went.
What do you?
I got a funny.
What's the? What do you mean inheriting your socks?
Well, all my socks had holes in them,
Yeah.
and everyone in my family knew this.
Yeah.
And so when my grandfather passed away, I got his socks.
Wow.
That's really interesting, man.
I know.
His socks were okay, and yours were not.
His socks were not holy.
Wow. All right. Well, that story was less interesting than I was.
No, it
expecting to
wasn't.
be.
Was not interesting.
Paul, I cut you off for this
That's
guy.
okay. I went shopping. I was a best man in a wedding once, and I was in Vancouver. We were getting we had to get a rental car with the groom. So it was me, the other groomsmen, and the groom. We all went out there. We were at Pacific Center looking at some things. The groom was getting some new shoes, and so the other groomsmen and I went across the hall to this other store, which is this, I can't even remember the name of it, but there's this really, Pacific Center Mall, I mean, it's full of these uppity, really expensive kind of places. So we went in and we were looking at socks, and I'm like, man, these socks are like, $35, $40 a pair. And this guy I'm with, he's like, you know what? We need some nice socks for this wedding. So he's like, I'm going to buy you a pair of socks. I'm like, all right. And he's going to buy a pair too. So we went through all the pairs and got them. And I got my pair. He got his, and he goes to pay. The bill is like $140 for 2 pairs of socks. And I was like, I looked and I was thinking to myself, man, he's got expensive taste into socks. And then I talked to him later, or I hear him talking to the groom later, and he's like, Paul's really got expensive taste in socks. He bought $100 socks. And I said, I said, mine were $100. I said, mine were the $30 pair. Like, I tried to find the cheapest one that place sold. Yeah. And he goes, and he's like, what? And he looks, he's like, oh, man. So it's totally himself who bought these crazy expensive socks.
I didn't even know socks could cost $100, man.
No, I know.
That ain't right.
I didn't know we could talk this long about socks.
Yeah.
I'm ready to move on.
I'm good too.
It's a good thing.
All right, let's get into some questions. If you have more questions, email extra@northview.org.
We should thank people for the
Yes.
proliferation of questions.
Yeah. A couple of weeks ago, we were low on questions, and now we've got a ton. So
Tons of
Thank you.
questions. Some listeners have sent in multiple questions. Keep doing it. It's good. So here's our first question for the day. Has to do with coloring and adult coloring books. Is coloring mandalas wrong?
There's a number of things that need to be said about this.
Like, do you mean a picture of Nelson Mandela?
First of all,
That's right.
well, first of all, could we just take a moment to reflect on the fact that there are such a thing as adult coloring books, but more than that, they're crazy popular.
Yeah, so if you look at, I saw a printout of the top 10 Christian books that were sold in March of like the month we're in.
Does it need to be Christian? That makes it even more
Yeah, no,
shameful.
the top 10 Christian books,
Oh,
3
man.
of them, 2 of them were Joel Osteen, 3 of them were adult coloring books.
The state of that is. I'm gonna go spend some time alone with the Lord today.
Yeah.
Just pray
Well, and the
over
other
that.
one was Jesus Calling,
Yeah.
which is always, none of our favorites.
Well, that's the
So-
depth that we go, I guess.
Okay, so here's the thing about adult coloring books is I don't actually think there's anything really wrong with them. Like I don't see any issue with someone wanting to color if they're an adult. I see it as no less.
Wait a minute. Are we jumping into the question here?
Are we not?
Well,
What do you want to say?
Okay, let's
Can I
backtrack
just
and let you do whatever you
back
want.
up for a moment? Well, I just thought that we should mention the fact that we're talking about. Are we talking about Mandela?
That's right. Okay, so when we were walking down from the office down the stairway, I was like, "Hey, did you guys see the questions about the Mandelas?" And Andy said, "Greg, it's pronounced mandala."
Well, first of all, I was trying to think of, I don't remember reading anything about Mandela in the questions.
So then we were joking about how, hey, maybe they're just adult coloring books full of pictures of Nelson Mandela. And I thought, how could 3 of those be the top 10 sellers of Amazon?
So the question specifically about, well, we looked into the pronunciation. And Paul, how do you pronounce it properly?
Mandala.
But I always thought it was Mandala, but it's Mandala.
So what are these?
It's not even that, Andy. It's mandala.
What's a mandala?
In Buddhism, particularly, I've seen this in Tantra Buddhism. You see these drawings. Now they're done in a number of different ways. I've seen them done with chalk, like the powder. I've seen them done as colorings. So these are intricate patterns that are drawn and then are often destroyed afterwards. And now their meaning, it seems to be pretty symbolic and kind of has a range of meanings. Paul, you were looking that up.
No, we were, yeah. So if you look it up, it's spelled Mandala. And if you look it up online, it just says that it is generally something, Oriental art that is concentric configuration of geometric shapes and it often contains an image of a deity or an attribute of a deity. So it is
a spiritual drawing.
It's a spiritual thing that Buddhists in general use. Yeah.
So what's the difference? So here, okay, I have a question. Are all of the adult coloring books, are they using mandalas as the pattern?
No, from what I've seen from the adult coloring books that I've looked at, they tend to have intricate patterns because people want to color interesting patterns and things that are intricate. So it takes time. They obviously just don't want to be doing these broad brushes, I guess. Although I must confess, I've never done an adult coloring book, although I have done a children's coloring book with my kids. And truth be told, I tend to enjoy it more than they do. But yeah, that's what I've seen. So I was kind of, I wasn't really surprised though to see. But so Paul's pulled up one on the computer right now, and so those are the ones that I've seen more is the ones with a lot of deities in them.
Right.
So some are just these, geometric drawings, but I actually haven't seen very many of those. That tends to be what the coloring books are.
Yeah.
Most of the ones I've seen have been very religious in nature and of deities and like heavenly pictures and whatnot that are intricately drawn. So my guess, though, is that the reason why mandalas are so popular in a coloring book is because they have such intricate opportunities for drawing.
Right. So
yeah, like if you go online and you just do a Google image search for a mandala, you will find ones with just like flowers. One looks like an owl. You get some kind of weird ones that you maybe don't want to deal with. But then there's also ones like you have the Buddhist section, you have the art section,
and as was mentioned, you got Christian coloring books. So clearly, I've never looked at a Christian coloring book, but I'm guessing that there's something Christian about what you're coloring.
Or maybe they're just void of spiritual mandalas. Maybe they're just picking the patterns that have no outright association with a deity.
Right. Or maybe it's like a stained glass window or something like that. Actually, I have seen that, where it's what looks like a stained glass window and you're painting that. So, but I'm with you, Greg, back to where you were going with this whole thing. I don't see anything wrong with coloring books. I mean, it's coloring books. Even though it's an adult coloring book, which seems a little odd, but I think for some people it's a good stress reliever. And I'm like, hey, if it's a good stress reliever, some people it's jogging, for myself, for example, and other people it's a coloring book. Go at it.
Right.
The question, I guess, though, and this is what the listener's asking: what about a mandala? Should you be coloring one of those? Which raises an important question that we deal with in multiple facets of life: is when other religions are creeping in to what it is that you're partaking in. At what level should you be participating?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the challenge is for us to not just view it as everything's totally benign, everything's totally void of meaning. And I'm leaning back on my assumption that a lot of us function like naturalists, even those of us who are Christians. Like, we just don't pay attention to the spiritual realm. We don't actually think that there are evil spirits who are active and involved in other world religions. And so because of that, we just go forward in some of these things and say, hey, whatever, it doesn't matter. Which I think is unwise, because I think
that's a great point.
That demons are real, and they try to oppose, and they try to the language of First Peter talks about the devil trying to devour people. So they're on a mission to be aggressive and try to take people down. And I think we're just straight up foolish if we think we can engage in all these different religious practices and come out totally unscathed or unharmed and just view it like, it's just like anything else.
Wouldn't you agree, though, that we tend to be bipolar on this, at least from what I've seen? Either you're, basically a Christian naturalist and you never talk about Satan or demons or, anything in the spiritual realm, and you avoid the topic entirely and pretend it doesn't exist, or you're hyper sensitive to it and everything is Satan.
Totally. Yeah, so I mean, one of the great things about like the atonement, Good Friday coming up, when we're going to celebrate what Christ did on the cross, one of the things he did was he was victorious over the powers. He's victorious over Satan and his authorities and his rulers and dominions and all that kind of stuff. Jesus is the victor. So as Christians, we do have power over those things because of who Christ is and his power. So we don't have to be fearful of it. And yet, I don't think we shouldn't just be totally ignorant of the fact that there are spiritual practices and there are things that people do to try to, empty their minds and pursue other worldviews. So I guess my differentiation here would be, if you're just coloring the mandalas because you like the adult coloring thing, then choose a better coloring book.
So that's the question, right? To color or not to color?
Yeah.
Greg, what would you say?
Don't color. There's other things you can color, which are going to be as intricate.
So you're saying, even the ones that are just the geometric shapes, we shouldn't color those? Or are you saying?
See, what I would say is that if you're knowingly seeking those patterns, then I would say why.
That have religious significance.
Yeah. If it's in a book and it looks like a bunch of patterns and you don't actually know that it's a mandala, I don't think we have to be fearful that by coloring it, you've now exposed you and your family to that specific demon.
I think intention is an important point here. What we're talking about here is if you are intentionally seeking those things out or participating in those things. Right. Because I've also met those other people that are just absolutely terrified that they're going to open a door into a spiritual realm of their house.
And that was part of the listener's question was that Satan was going to trick us somehow into some thing through this. And I don't think that we can, if we're just coloring a pattern just for the sake of coloring, like we see a pretty flower or a collage of flowers in one of these things and we color it, I don't think that we can be unwittingly drawn into something like that. But if we are purposely going to it seeking our inner peace, or we're seeking to be one with creation through this or something like that, yes, then you're opening yourself up to possible spiritual influence. But if you're just looking at this picture and it's pretty and you want to color it, I remember as a kid, like we were talking about stained glass window, you'd paint these little plastic stained glass things, and then you'd glue them up to your window in the kitchen, or your mom would, even though you colored it not very good, and and you would let the sun shine in, whatever, and that's totally fine. But if you're going to it with the intention, like some kind of a spiritual search through it, then you're opening yourself up to it.
Okay, so a few weeks ago, I talked about a book written by John Eldredge, talking about, I forget the name, Walking with God is the name of the book. Okay, so one of the other main practices that he talks about in this book, I think is massively problematic, is his understanding of spiritual warfare, which is, people who would be influenced by Eldredge would be more warm to the idea that if you are unknowingly engaging in something like coloring a mandala that's not overtly religious but is like a secret hidden one, that by your participation in that, you are actually now opening up your house to a specific demon who will oppress you and come after you until you repent of that specific act that welcomed that specific demon into your family's into the family picture kind of thing, right? So I understand where people are coming from, because they're reading people like Eldredge, or they're hearing about this kind of teaching where, hey, you're basically living terrified that the meat you ate at the restaurant wasn't prayed over by a Hindu cook in the back who sacrificed it, or who gave it as an offering to one of his gods, and now says, may whoever eats this also praise you. Like, you open yourself up to a whole world of fear and total no idea, no ability to go through life with any sense of Jesus being the victor over the powers.
Just going to say, you're giving the enemy more power than you are to God.
Right.
And then, like you said, Greg, that he is the victor.
Right.
So I think we're saying color away, but don't intentionally seek after these mandalas that have this spiritual connection. The spiritual world is real and is active, and we need to be aware but not afraid of it.
Totally. Yep.
Good. Yeah. I think the listener too, just to kind of nuance it a bit, she's worried that by unintentionally picking one of these up from Kohl's and coloring it, you're allowing Satan into your mind. And her friends and family are saying that that's true. And I wonder, how does this translate to other religious practices as well that you're not intentionally
we could flip that on its head though and ask, okay, so what should the Christian with the atheist son do? Should they try to get Christian coloring books, and should they be, because they're wanting
That's a good point.
to be influenced from the positive as though it works like that.
Yeah.
And this gets back to the point that we were making. Intention is key. I mean, because again, this is going to get back. Not to go back in circles again, but this is just going to lead to a life of fear.
Yeah.
If you go down that path, and I don't think that we're called to live in a life of fear. We don't need to fear.
Yeah, God's after our hearts, right? And it's not these little actions that are.
And when you say after our hearts,
Yeah.
again, what we're talking about is intention.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So when you go buy a coloring book from Kohl's for $30,
Yes.
and you color away without intentionally coloring a mandala, you have not done anything wrong.
No, I mean, see, look, I think it would be wise for you to look at the back side of the book and see what the write-up is of it.
Yeah.
Where they get the patterns from, what's going on here. If it just looks like a benign, a totally harmless, for lack of a better word, approach to just put some nice intricate designs in a book, I'd say color away without fear. If you look at the back of the book and it says, these pictures have been taken from mandalas from various world religions as a way of praising and engaging, and I'd say, put the book down and go find a new one.
Yeah.
So we should never, as Christians, pick up anything off the shelf without looking at what we're engaging in. We should actually care about what we're buying.
I mean, that goes within reason. That goes to everything that we do.
Yep.
Yep.
From
Yep.
what we
Oh,
watch to what we
goodness.
listen, everything.
Yeah.
And there's tons of these coloring books around, so
And-
there's lots of options.
And Christian ones are super popular, which maybe this is why, is because you have a lot of people who want to do the coloring, but they're freaked out that they're going to accidentally color a mandala. So these publishing companies have been like, cool, let's just publish some intricate designs and make a boatload of money. One boat full of money.
All right, let's move on to our next question.
An entire boat of money.
Did you hear about the boat? This is
Yes.
totally off
Yes.
topic. In England, this $2 billion Antarctic ship explorer. They put a thing out to the English people, and they were like, "Give us name suggestions." And the winning name for this new $2 billion boat is Bodie McBoatface.
Isn't that awesome?
And that's really what the name is.
Yeah.
And so it's like the HMS Bodie McBoatface.
Yeah.
Now the government isn't obligated to follow this, so they won't. But anyway, it was just
Apparently,
an interesting to see how our culture responds to stuff like this now.
They've done this before with BC Ferries. They did this with the BC Ferries too. They had
Okay.
a naming contest. I can't remember what the names were, but they just. Why would you do that?
Here's the
Put
thing.
the public.
we can never trust the public.
Yeah.
With doing things well. What we do is we decide to make it a joke. We all get in on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of the next highest ones in that competition was the USS, not the Titanic.
Right.
That's
Another
what it was
one was
called.
the Pingu.
See, like these are great names for boats.
Or think about the movies in which they've had the internet, community help write the script. I mean,
Just awful.
that's how you get what was it? Plane with snakes.
Snakes on a plane.
Snakes on a yeah.
Since when has the
And I think
internet community?
Sharknado.
Oh,
is
Sharknado, yeah.
I have not seen either of those. I don't plan on it. When a community wrote the script, I say no. At any rate, you said you had a question, Matt.
Yeah. Can God create a stone so large even he can't lift it?
Somebody actually wrote that in.
Andy,
Yes.
this
They-
is apologetics
this is the-
all over it, man.
You think that's an apologetic question?
I do.
All right.
How is it not? That's a total philosophy.
I agree. It's a philosophical question. There's 5 listeners out there that are just itching to hear an answer to
Yeah.
that, and the rest
That's
are
okay.
like,
You know what?
why do we have people that ask those questions?
That's okay. The other listeners just know there's another question coming. You can Google Bodie McBoatface right now without shame. We'll call you back when we're ready for you. Okay. But Andy, there's 5 people who need to hear this.
Yeah, they need an answer to this. Can God create a stone so big that he can't lift it? Those kind of questions. This, interestingly enough, I think has some interesting implications when we're asking the question: is God logically possible? Is having an omnipotent, all-powerful God, is that actually possible? Can you be all-powerful? And I guess the question you have to ask is all-powerful in compared to what? So when we talk about God, to use Anselm, we would say that God is that which none greater can be conceived. So in that sense, that's what we mean by God. Now, to ask whether or not God could do something, though, that's logically impossible, this is to ask something that's a nonsensical question. For example, could God create a square circle? Well, no, we can't. And I guess in that sense, if we're going to say, well, can God do everything? Well, no, he can't do something that's not logically possible. Or for that matter, God can't do something that's outside of his nature. And this is an important one for people to understand about God, particularly because this has implications beyond just, can God create a stone so big he can't lift? So the answer to that is no, he can't, because this would be to do something outside of his nature. But Plato asks an interesting question in his dialogues. It's called the Euthyphro dilemma, is often how it's phrased. And that is, where does goodness come from? Does goodness come outside of God? And so that's how God knows what goodness is? Or does God just arbitrarily decide what the goodness is? And then that's what he just says. Okay, that's what good is. And in which case, if goodness is outside of God, well then, it doesn't have anything to do with God. And if goodness is just arbitrary and he's just deciding what it is, well, then he could change anything. And so he could just say that rape is good, for example. And so what you have in these situations is what we would call a dilemma. This is a logical dilemma. Another famous logical dilemma that Christians wrestle with all the time is, why does God allow good things? Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? Right? If God's all powerful, then he should be able to stop evil. And if God's all good, then he should want to do it. But yet we live in a world full of evil. Well, how do I logically understand that? And so that then gets into this question, well, what can God do and what can't he do? So when you have this dilemma, to wrap this up, in Christianity, we would say that we split the horns of the dilemma and demonstrate that there can be other options, other answers. For example, with the Euthyphro dilemma, that God is good. And this is significant because what we're saying is that God's nature is goodness. This is what God is, and God can't change his nature. He can't change the essence of what or who he is. And so when we're asking these logical questions, one of the things that we've got to ask ourselves is, who is God? What do we mean by God? And by that we can start to understand, okay, what is God logically able to do and what is God not able to do? Did that make sense, guys?
Totally.
Yeah, 100%. I think it was Lewis or Chesterton, one of the two, who said that you can't put nonsensical combinations of words together and expect them to have meaning, which means you can't have God be and not be at the same time, or something of the sort. Which goes along with the listener actually has a second question on top of that, which is, can God do absolutely anything, or is he bound by some logical categories, which you have answered for us?
Yeah.
Great. So those listeners who are searching Bodie McBoatface right now, come back. Take a seat. Come listen to the podcast. We have one last question, and this has to do with translations of the Bible. The question is, some Christians seem to argue that the ESV or other translations are not as reliable as the KJV, but I find the KJV cumbersome to read. These authors argue that the other translations use less reliable sources. Is this true? And is the ESV trustworthy?
So I think we need to paint the picture here a little bit for listeners who might not otherwise be interested or aware of what's going on here. You have people, Christian pastors and teachers, who will insist that the King James Version of the Bible is not only a better translation, but is actually God's inerrant word.
This is what they're asking.
This is the core of the viewpoint that all other translations, like the NIV and the ESV and the NET, whatever, pick your version, the Net Bible, all of them are not trustworthy because the argument goes that the King James version is God's inerrant word, that version of the Bible
would they say
is
that,
without error. Oh yeah.
Okay, I've never heard it placed that way. The way I've heard it phrased is that it is the most accurate translation.
Yeah. I mean, So if you're hardcore, you would say that it actually is God's word to us.
I've seen that too. At least 3 websites I looked at this week said it's God's word. Everything else is from the devil.
Right.
Well, okay, because we're going to agree that the King James Version is God's word.
Right.
But this qualifier that everything else, every other translation is from the devil, I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. And I think I'm glad that the listener wrote this in because I'd like to dialogue. I think we need a dialogue with what is a good translation and what are we talking about? Because interestingly enough, when we're talking about the inerrant word of God, we're actually talking about the autographs. Mm-hmm. We are talking about the original Greek manuscripts, not the King James.
Right. So there's a recognition then that God authoritatively speaks through human authors. And those authors wrote to a particular place in a particular time for a particular reason in a particular language. And it's through that God's the Greek for in 2 Timothy theopneustos that the words
God
themselves
breathed.
are God breathed. They're his very words through the intent of the author. And so any other language now that you try to get those words from is a translation of the originals. Mm-hmm. So whenever anyone talks about inerrancy or about infallibility, they're putting that language on the English translations because that's what we read and use, and yet there's always the qualifier that what they're talking about is the original languages, that those are the ones that are inerrant without error.
Well, now let's just pause there for a moment because this is where the whole conversation demonstrates how ridiculous it is. Because God has relied on translation from the very beginning. Note, we have Greek, we have a Greek autograph, but it was not Greek conversation that was taking place.
Right.
So these are already translations of Aramaic conversations that were taking place.
Right. Yeah. So I think we need to do our best work with the original documents to try to make sure that it's accurate to what the authors were intending to say. Different translations will take different approaches.
Well, this now gets into hermeneutics.
Yeah.
We're talking about the science. Some people so the science of interpretation is what is the definition of hermeneutics, which is interesting because I said this once to somebody and they're like, well, I don't know that it's a science, and as though that was a bad thing. No, we're talking about what does it look
process,
like? Yeah, the process to systematically understand, okay, in literature, which, by the way, we do with everything we read, not just the Bible, how do we understand it? How do we translate it? Not just the language, but how do you culturally translate it? How do you personally understand it? And the goal is to make sure that when we translate the Bible into English or to any other language for that matter, that we are seeking to faithfully communicate the message that was being conveyed. Now, this is where things get interesting when we look at translations, is because you have 2 main forms of translations that you can look at. You can see a word-for-word translation, and you can see a thought-for-thought translation. So what are some word-for-word translations?
Word for word?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when you look at that spectrum, you're talking about the dynamic equivalency spectrum.
So what
right?
does that mean?
Yeah.
And so dynamic equivalency, you can have ones that are highly that way, which is the thought for thought. So that would be more like the
thought for thought really far would be like the Message.
Well, yeah, the Message is which doesn't even actually fall on the translation scale.
Right,
it falls off
be
of
falling off of
as a paraphrase. But probably the one furthest that way would be the NLT that I know of.
Yeah, it would probably be.
And then
one of the most well-known ones that
Right.
would be thought for thought.
right,
Yep.
and then when you get more into the middle, you get the NIV, which kind of tries to have a balance, and the ESV tries to be more word for word, but it really still has a lot of dynamic equivalency in it.
And then-
because in order to do the translation, you just have to have that.
Well, that's where things get interesting. If you go a little bit past the ESV, you see NASB, and then if you were to go really far to the spectrum, you would get to an interlineary Bible, which is a literal translation of word for word.
Right. You have the Greek text above and
Yeah.
the English word of what that Greek word is below. And if there's no direct English parallel, then they
Just leave it
a
blank.
little blank and
Right.
then they go to the next word.
Yeah, and it's like that with any language. You can't. There's words that just don't translate over into another language exact.
Right.
Yeah.
Like my parents understand German, and when they talk, there'll be words and phrases and situations they'll come across, and these phrases in German will come to their mind, and they'll say it, and I'll go, "What does that mean?" And they go, I don't know. It doesn't really translate into
Right.
English. I don't know how to say it in English.
I was on a missions
Like-
trip once to
Go ahead.
Thailand. Well, I was on a missions trip once to Thailand, and we had this translator that traveled with us while we were there. And I noticed at the airport when we were traveling, she had a magazine that she was reading. And the entire magazine was simply to help translators understanding English euphemisms that, in these different kind of word plays that we do that are notoriously difficult to translate.
Right.
But the thing is you see this in the Greek as well. The Greek uses idioms as well, and you got to do some work if you're going to understand what's being communicated. But one of my pet peeves, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this, is I've met a lot of people that have this idea that the ESV is the new King James. And
Right.
It's the most it's the best translation. It's the most accurate translation. And this really bugs me personally, because one of the things that when you begin to look at Greek and when you begin to look at Hebrew, and the more you do study, the more you understand that sometimes you'll be in a verse and the NIV nails it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll be in a verse and the ESV nails it. Sometimes it's the NASB that nails it. Often I'll find that it's the NLT, the New Living Translation, that nails it. Or then there's other times where you got to just go to the interlineary because it nails it. Because of the passage, think about it in English. You don't use euphemisms or idioms in everyday, in everything you say. So in those times that you do that, well, a thought for thought's going to be necessary there, because if you did a word for word, you're going to totally miss the point. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and also with different genres as well, it's a little bit. So
Yes,
at
right.
some points, normally we preach through the ESV here because, we think for the most part it gets at what's going on in the original language the best. Just if you're going to take one translation and use it primarily, that's the decision.
But you'll
we've
notice
made.
that we're all over the board, even here at Northview.
Totally. And there are passages where, the preacher will come up and say, you know what, I'm reading from the NLT this week because the ESV does a brutal job here of unpacking what actually is going on in this text to make it clear for us. So we're not, that's a great point. We're not the ESV onlyists now, right? We don't want to go so far.
And now here's the
other
problem that I
direction.
have with the King James version of the Bible. And the problem I've got with that version is with any version of the Bible will have to continually be translated. This is not a one-time, one-and-done thing. Language is in constant change and flux. And so if the goal is communication, then the translations will have to continually be updated so that we are accurately translating what the meaning, the message that was being communicated. So one of the problems I have then with the King James, and it's the reason why they have to do the new King James, is because that we don't use that language anymore. It's outdated. And in fact, in many ways, it becomes unhelpful because it's not communicating clearly any longer.
So the second part of that question was the claim that the ESV uses less reliable source material. Is that true? They're saying that the original Greek texts the King James Version used were more reliable than the texts that the ESV used.
No, I don't think that's accurate. If you look at Bruce Metzger, who was I think he passed away in the last couple of years. Anyway, he was one of the chief Bible scholars in the world when it came to translations, and and there's a number of these gentlemen and women too who go and they study the original manuscripts. And when the King James was done, they didn't have many of the manuscripts that we have now, which are older and closer to the original than the Latin that
and the main
that
one
they
that
would
we
have been
used
translated
was the
from
Masoretic text. Was the main text that
for the Hebrew.
the Hebrew that we used in translation. But you're absolutely right. We now have,
even the Greek ones though. I mean, now we've got texts that are like original manuscripts that have been found that are within just a mere few decades of when it was originally written.
Or even the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example.
Totally, yeah.
And one of the things that we're able to do is to compare these different documents and to see, okay, as we're looking at those, we're able to see what is the most accurate translation. What if we see, okay, it gets translated like this in one text. For example, this is going to be coming up in Psalm 22. There is one text where it says that they pierced his hands and feet. Well, one says that something to the effect of a lion clawed his hands and feet. So one text says that. The vast majority of the other ones say pierced, right? So then in a situation like that, in Psalm 22, then we're going to go to what are the majority saying?
Yeah, and sometimes it works with the majority, but sometimes it actually goes to ones where, because they look at the whole text. So like if you have like the Alexandrian text for the Greek, it's considered very reliable because it has the least amount of variance in it. So when they look at these old texts and they translate it to English. So when they did the King James, they were primarily working off of the Latin, right? They were working off of the Vulgate, off of whatever the Catholic Church had at the time is what they were working off of. But
I believe that was Jerome's translation.
Yes, right. And so, but now we've got manuscripts that are much older in Greek, in Hebrew. And they tend to be so.
So that's not to say that the King James isn't accurate. We would say that it is, but we would say that doesn't mean anything else.
The amazing thing is the amount of or how similar they are, even though the manuscripts are hundreds of years apart, and how similar they actually are is a testimony.
Yeah, because
to,
I mean, if that on that note,
Yeah.
if that were to be the case, I mean, that would be to say, well, how can we trust our Bible? But the reality is that when we look at the documents, that they demonstrate that they're incredibly reliable.
Yeah.
Now, here's what to me is a more important factor, because whenever they do translation, I mean, they got great source material to do the translation, either the King James or Now. And we would say it's even better now because we get more and more source material that demonstrates that it is accurate. What concerns me, though, is the scholars doing the translation work, and particularly if do you have a team of scholars doing this translation work together? Is this a sole individual doing it? I mean, this is one of the problems that I have with translations, of course, like the New World Translation. So this is the Jehovah's Witnesses, translation of the Bible that, clearly the theology.
Or the Passion Translation. How about that one?
Yeah, and then I was going to bring up the Passion Translation, where you have one individual, right, who is doing this translation.
Yeah.
And in both cases, you see that there's this desire to favor their theology. And I think that's where you need a team of scholars working together, that it's not favoring one person's theology, and that you are seeking to be accurate to communicate the message of the Bible.
Yeah. There's a confidence in the numbers of people involved in Bible translation. You look at NIV or ESV, or you look through the people involved in the editing process, and they're not all from one denominational background, and they're not all the students of the same school. They teach at different schools. They were educated in different places. They serve in different kinds of denominations. So what you have is a real community discernment process of what's the best way to unpack this original phrase so that we understand its meaning and the author's intent into our English language.
You know, Wycliffe does this as well, as they do Bible translation work around the world, is they always put together a team of people of indigenous speakers that helps with that missionary as they're seeking to do translation work. Again, the goal is communication.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, another thing that's probably helpful for people to hear, especially if they're trying to think through, man, how much can we even trust the Bible if there's these kinds of controversies of King James or ESV or whatever. When you look at the amount of source material that we have as Bible translators compared to any other ancient document out there, it's not even close in terms of the amount of copies we have, the date, how old they are. All of that is just astronomically more than all kinds of books that we would trust as accurate, like Plato's Republic and like the Iliad and Odyssey. All of these kinds of books that we just unwaveringly consider accurate. Have embarrassing histories compared to the Bible when it comes to the amount of material.
When looking at the New Testament, we have something like 25,000 different manuscripts that are within the first 100 years from when they were been originally written. And then you look at something like Plato's writings, and you have of ancient manuscripts that have been found are in like the dozens, and they were found to be within like 500 years of when he lived. So you look at that discrepancy, and nobody questions what Plato says.
No.
Well, or more than that, whether or not he existed. I don't know if you guys noticed, but in Maclean's, I think it just came out in Maclean's this month.
Oh, probably because it's Easter.
Because it's Easter. Is this, again, saying, did Jesus really exist? Which it just drives me crazy, right? I mean, because here, if you're going to question Jesus' existence, of which we have better evidence for him in antiquity than anyone else, but yet nobody's questioning whether or not Plato existed.
You would look crazy to question if Plato or Aristotle were real dudes.
Or Alexander the Great. We have way better evidence that Jesus existed than Alexander the Great.
So the point is that we should be confident that what we have in our Bibles and on our Bible programs of various different translations that have been compiled by a team of scholars are really trustworthy, and we can read them, and God, through His Spirit, will speak to us and reveal truth to us and equip us for every good work in following Him.
And when you're reading your ESV and you come across a phrase that seems weird, because there's certain phrases, I mean, even in preaching the Psalms over the last month, we've chosen to use the NLT in certain instances, or the NET, the Net Bible, in certain instances, because the ESV just, in our opinion, didn't do a good job of the translation. So so if you're reading and you come across that in your ESV, go ahead and pull out the NIV, pull out the NLT, and compare them and go, okay, what's the difference here? And then have a good study Bible with you, see what scholars are saying, because it's
what a privilege, hey?
It's amazing.
So much
amazing
at our fingertips. And one of the things that I often tell people as well when they're reading the Bible, that we want to take a bird's eye view of the Bible. You read the Bible in books, chapters, paragraphs, sentences, and maybe you would look at a word. I don't think people realize, I mean, Greg, Paul, how rare is it that you actually study a single Greek word? I mean, it's incredibly rare that a single word makes a very big difference.
Well, and even that, a lot of bad teaching comes from overemphasizing what one single word could mean, and you totally,
I call that a worm's eye view.
Yeah, you totally neglect where that word fits in the sentence, paragraph.
So chapter. You do the exact opposite. You start with a word, then you go to the sentence, paragraph, chapter, book. I mean, who does that? You never look to understand the meaning of something by starting with a word and working your way out. You always start from a top down, not a bottom up.
Right. Yeah. When we do the look at the book stuff classes at TLC that I've taught a bit, and Crystal has helped teach a bit, we'll often say when we get to a confusing phrase in a chapter, we'll say, man, what does that mean? And then I'll say, okay, let's keep reading. because we'll probably find out, or
Yeah.
or there's going to be
Yeah.
a comparison, or there's going to be, the author says the same thing in a different way later. So no, yeah, it's good. It's a good word.
Yeah.
Read it from bird's eye.
Great. Well, thank you for listening. This has been the Extra Podcast, episode 248. This is the last episode before Easter this weekend.
That's right.
So enjoy time with your families.
Yeah. And next week, we have, after Easter, we have Christianity Explored starting here. So if you have some unbelieving friends and family, coworkers that you want to share the gospel with,
Or if you just need to know more about Christianity.
yeah, totally, exactly. Come on out Wednesday nights, starting at 7:00, starting on March 30th, and we're gonna have snacks. There's no cost; it's free. We get a DVD study, a book included. Come on out; we'd love to have you.
So one last question: turkey or ham? Easter dinner.
As long
Uh,
as it's meat, I'll eat it.
I think it's ham, right?
I do ham.
Preferably
Does
both
anybody
together.
do the pig turducken?
I've done that once.
Really?
It wasn't very good.
Yeah.
Is turkey a thing for Easter?
Yeah,
we,
some
we
people.
used to do it. Yeah.
Wow.
One-
Turkey
I know.
is the most overrated of all the fowl.
This is gonna be our next.
Would you say it's the
poll
foulest
question.
fowl?
Is-
Is it the foulest fowl?
Turkey's awful. There's some good turkey. I've had a few good pieces
I
of
think
turkey
you're going
in
to
my
find
life.
if we do a survey,
Yeah,
it's
Greg,
going to
should
be
we do
like
a
the
poll?
mustard survey, and Greg's going to be in the vast minority.
Look, I'm not saying everyone hates turkey. I'm saying I think turkey is overrated as a fancy
Yeah,
meal
and you'll be
food.
in the minority.
No.
Yes,
if you had a
totally.
choice between roast beef and turkey,
Well, if it's turkey dinner though, turkey dinner with gravy, stuffing, like the whole deal, I'm going turkey.
you know how you fix it? You just throw some mustard on that bad boy.
Yeah, seriously. Let's do it. Poll question: is turkey overrated? Sunday night, you'll eat your turkey. Email extra@northview.org with your questions and your poll responses. Thank you for listening. This has been episode 248. This is your not so silent producer, Matt.
Poochie. Poochie.